A 2024 survey found that Gen X values personal privacy more than any other living generation by a significant margin. That's not stubbornness. That's neuroscience. People raised before the internet developed fundamentally different psychological boundaries, ones that became permanently wired into their identity, which means every time you close the door, guard your inner life, or refuse to overshare, you are not being difficult. You are protecting something that most people have already lost. And today, I want to show you exactly what that is. My name is David, and if that need for privacy sounds familiar, you're not alone. Let me ask you something. When something hard happens in your life, something real, something heavy, what do? You don't reach for your phone. You don't open an app. You don't type out your feelings for 300 strangers to react to with a small yellow emoji. You sit with it. Maybe you go quiet for a few days. Maybe you take a long drive alone. Maybe you stare out the window with a cold cup of coffee and just let it move through you in private, in silence, on your own terms. And that right there is something the world has almost completely forgotten how to do. Because somewhere along the way, the world decided that a feeling only counts if it's witnessed. That pain is only valid if it's posted. That joy isn't real until it's shared with strangers who will forget it by tomorrow. But you never believe that. You still close the door when you're on the phone. Not because you're hiding, but because some conversations are sacred. You still keep certain friendships off social media. Not because you're ashamed, but because some relationships are too real to perform. You process things privately, deeply, completely, and when you come out the other side, you come out whole. The world looks at that and sees walls. But what they're actually seeing is dignity, a quiet, unshakable dignity that this generation carries almost without knowing it. And it was never a flaw. It was always a strength. To understand this, you have to go back, not just a few years, further than that, back to a time before the internet existed, before social media, before smartphones, before the world had a window into your living room, your bedroom, your most private moments. Back to a childhood where your thoughts lived in a diary with a small metal lock, where your conversations happened face-to-face, or on a kitchen phone with a cord, so short you had to hunch against a wall to speak quietly, where your embarrassing moments stayed in the room where they happened and didn't follow you forever on a screen. That was the world that shaped you. And here's what that world did. Quietly, without anyone planning it, it taught you that your inner life was yours, that not everything needed an audience, that some things gained power precisely because they stayed private. Psychologists call this something important. They call it the development of a private self, a self that exists independently of other people's perception, a self that doesn't need to be seen to feel real. Gen X developed that self, deeply, naturally, because the world they grew up in demanded nothing less. There were no followers counting your worth, no metrics measuring your value, no algorithm deciding whether your life was interesting enough. You just lived, and that living, unobserved, unperformed, unrecorded, built something inside you that most people today will never fully have, a self that belongs entirely to you. There's a word that gets misused a lot these days: privacy. People hear it and they think secrets. They think something to hide. They think a person who is closed off, unavailable, unwilling to connect. But that is not what privacy means. Not really, and definitely not for you. For you, privacy was never about secrets. It was about sovereignty. Think about what that word means for a moment. Sovereignty, the right to govern yourself, the right to own your own territory, the right to decide what enters and what doesn't. That is what privacy always was for Gen X. The right to own a thought before the world got to judge it. The right to feel something fully, grief, joy, confusion, love, before being asked to perform it for an audience. The right to make a mistake in private, process it quietly, and come out the other side without a public record of your worst moment. Psychologist Carl Rogers spent his life studying what makes a person truly whole. And one of his most powerful ideas was this: that a healthy human being needs what he called an inner life, a private world of thoughts, feelings, and experiences that exist independently of other people's approval. Gen X has that inner life, deeply, stubbornly, almost instinctively, and in a world that is rapidly losing the ability to be alone with itself, to sit quietly with a feeling without immediately broadcasting it. That inner life is not a weakness. It is one of the most psychologically sophisticated things a human being can possess. You were never closed. You were just complete. You have watched something happen over the past decade or so, slowly at first, then faster, then so normalized that nobody even questions it anymore. You have watched people live stream their breakdowns, cry on camera for strangers, post their most painful moments, divorces, losses, mental health struggles, family conflicts, and wait for the comments, wait for the likes, wait for 300 strangers to tell them that their pain is valid. And you watch this quietly from a distance, and something inside you shifts uncomfortably, not with judgment exactly. You don't want to judge. These are human beings in pain. And pain deserves compassion regardless of how it expressed. But something still recoils. Because you remember what it felt like to process something privately, to take your grief and sit with it alone, not because you had no one, but because some things needed to be felt before they could be spoken, because there was a dignity in that, a quiet strength that came from moving through something without an audience. And what you are watching now feels different. It feels like a generation that has lost the ability to be alone with itself, that cannot sit in a room with a hard feeling for more than 60 seconds before reaching for a phone, that needs external validation to confirm that what they are feeling is real, that is confused performing emotion with actually processing it. Psychologists have a term for this. They call it emotional outsourcing, the gradual loss of the ability to regulate your own inner world without the help of an audience. Gen X never outsourced their emotions. They carried them, quietly, completely, and in a world that has forgotten how. That quiet caring is worth more than anyone is giving it credit for. Can I be honest with you about something? There is a grief that Gen X carries that nobody really talks about. Not grief for a person, not grief for a relationship or a career or a chapter of life. Grief for a world where your pain belonged to you, where your joy was something you held close before you shared it, if you shared it at all, where your struggles happened behind closed doors, in quiet rooms, in long drives alone, and came out the other side refined, stronger, more yours. Do you remember that world? Do you remember what it felt like to have a hard week and not document it, to go through something difficult and let it stay between you and the people who truly knew you, to feel something privately, completely, without the pressure of an audience waiting for your reaction? There was a dignity in that, a quiet, invisible dignity that didn't need to be seen to be real. And that world is almost gone now, not dramatically, not all at once, but quietly, the way all meaningful things disappear. It has been fading, replaced by a culture that measures the value of an experience by how many people witnessed it, that grades your pain by how many people validated it. That cannot imagine a life worth living that isn't also a life worth posting. And you feel that loss. Maybe you couldn't name it before right now, but you feel it in the way the world moves too fast and too loud and too publicly, in the way privacy itself has become something people are suspicious of, in the quiet ache of watching something sacred, something that once made life feel meaningful and dignified and deeply human, slowly disappear. So let's sit with something for a moment, because I want to offer you a different way of looking at all of this. For years, maybe without even realizing it, you may have wondered if something was wrong with you, if your need for privacy was a limitation, if your discomfort with oversharing was just you being old-fashioned, out of touch, unable to adapt to the way the world works now. I want to gently, clearly, and completely push back on that. Because here is what nobody is actually saying out loud. Gen X didn't fail to adapt to the oversharing world. They just never forgot something that the oversharing world is desperately trying to remember. What it feels like to truly own yourself. To have thoughts that haven't been edited for an audience. To have feelings that haven't been performed for approval. To have an identity that wasn't built from likes and comments and follower counts, but from actual lived experience. From quiet mornings. From hard conversations, from private victories that nobody clapped for but meant everything. Psychologist Sherry Tickle spent years researching what constant connectivity does to the human sense of self, and what she found was quietly devastating. She found that when people never have time alone, truly alone, with their own thoughts, unobserved and unperformed, they begin to lose the ability to know who they actually are. Gen X knows who they are, not perfectly, not without doubt, but deeply, privately, in a way that doesn't require external confirmation to feel real. That self, uncurated, unperformed, quietly sovereign, is not something to be ashamed of. It is something increasingly rare and increasingly necessary in a world that has forgotten how to be alone with itself. You never forgot. I want to leave you with something, not a strategy, not a list, not a 5-step plan for protecting your privacy in the digital age. Just a thought, a quiet one. You'll spend your whole life in a world that kept asking you to be more open, more visible, more available, more public. A world that looked at your closed door and called it a problem, that looked at your quiet inner life and called it a limitation, that looked at your need for privacy and called it fear. But what if they had it backwards? What if choosing privacy in a world that demands total transparency is not the act of someone who is afraid? What if it is the act of someone who understands something profound, something that took the rest of the world decades to even begin to realize, that not everything should be shared, that some thoughts gain their power in silence, that some feelings become wisdom only when processed privately, that some parts of a human life are sacred, not because they are shameful, but because they are yours, completely, irreducibly, beautifully yours. There is a quote, and I think about it often, from the writer Susan Sontag. She said that the camera makes everyone a tourist in other people's reality, and eventually, in their own. Gen X refused to become a tourist in their own life. They stayed present, private, real, and in a world that confused performance with authenticity, that quiet refusal to perform is perhaps the most honest thing left. You were never closed off. You were never afraid. You were just protecting something worth protecting. Your inner life, your private self, your quiet, sovereign, deeply human soul. And that was never something to explain, or apologize for, or change.